In the late summer of 1862, the momentum of the American Civil War appeared to shift in favor of the Confederacy. Fresh from a decisive victory at the Second Battle of Bull Run, General Robert E. Lee resolved to carry the conflict beyond the borders of the seceded states. His objective was not merely tactical, it was profoundly strategic. By moving into Maryland, a border state with divided loyalties, Lee sought to relieve the war-weary Virginia countryside, secure vital supplies, and strike a psychological blow against the Union. Lee's ambitions extended beyond the battlefield. A successful campaign on Union soil might undermine Northern morale, sway public opinion ahead of the midterm elections, and increase pressure on President Lincoln to negotiate peace. Furthermore, Confederate leadership harbored hope that such a bold move could prompt recognition from Britain and France, both of which had economic interests tied to Southern cotton. As Lee's Army of Northern Virginia advanced into Maryland in early September, the Confederate cause seemed ascendant. Yet a critical misstep would soon compromise the campaign. A copy of Lee's Special Order 191, his confidential marching orders, was discovered by Union troops outside Frederick, Maryland, wrapped around a bundle of cigars. The order revealed that Lee had divided his forces, a risky decision predicated on the assumption of slow Union pursuit. Major General George B. McClellan, commanding the Union Army of the Potomac, suddenly held a rare advantage, foreknowledge of his opponent's movements. However, McClellan, cautious by nature and chronically overestimating enemy strength, failed to act with the decisiveness the moment demanded. He delayed for nearly 18 hours, allowing Lee to reposition and consolidate his scattered divisions near the town of Sharpsburg, along the banks of Antietam Creek. Thus, what might have been a swift and crushing Union blow evolved instead into a confrontation of staggering proportions. The stage was set for a battle that would unfold with unprecedented ferocity, shaped by the ambitions of a Confederate general determined to alter the course of the war, and a Union response too tentative to fully seize the opportunity. Dawn broke on September 17, 1862, beneath a shroud of fog and gunpowder. By 5:30 a.m., Union artillery opened fire north of Sharpsburg, signaling the start of what would become the bloodiest single day in American military history. General Joseph Hooker's I Corps launched the initial assault against the Confederate left flank, anchored in a patch of farmland that would become infamous, the Miller Cornfield. What began as an organized offensive rapidly descended into chaos. Troops advanced and fell back through the corn, stalks flattened under relentless musketry and artillery barrages. The field changed hands repeatedly as reinforcements arrived, only to be torn apart by well-positioned Confederate batteries and determined infantry. Neither side gained a permanent hold, but the casualties mounted with staggering speed. To the southeast, attention shifted to a sunken wagon path, an old farm road worn down over time, which became a focal point of the morning's combat. Here, Union forces under General William French encountered intense resistance from Confederate troops commanded by D.H. Hill. The road's natural depression offered momentary protection for the defenders, but it also became a trap. As Union regiments gained higher ground, they fired directly into the Confederate line, turning the so-called sunken road into what soldiers later called Bloody Lane. By mid-morning, thousands lay dead or dying along its length. Meanwhile, on the southern end of the battlefield, Union General Ambrose Burnside faced the daunting task of crossing a narrow stone bridge over Antietam Creek. Confederate sharpshooters, entrenched on the bluffs above, raked the crossing with fire. For 3 hours, Burnside's men attempted to force a passage. After repeated repulses and heavy casualties, they finally secured the bridge around 1 p.m., pushing the Confederate right flank into retreat. Just as Burnside's forces prepared to exploit this success, a fresh Confederate division under General A.P. Hill arrived from Harper's Ferry after a forced march. Striking the exposed Union flank in the late afternoon, Hill's timely intervention checked Burnside's advance and stabilized Lee's vulnerable right. As darkness fell, both armies held their ground, bloodied and exhausted. The Union had made gains but failed to deliver a decisive blow. Lee's army, though battered and outnumbered, remained defiant on the field. The creek that gave the battle its name flowed red with the cost of indecision, valor, and brutal engagement. When the guns finally fell silent on the evening of September 17, 1862, the battlefield around Sharpsburg bore the full weight of unprecedented devastation. In a span of less than 12 hours, over 22,700 men were killed, wounded, or missing, roughly split between the two sides. The Army of the Potomac suffered approximately 12,400 casualties, while the Army of Northern Virginia endured around 10,300. It remains the bloodiest single day in American military history. The scale of loss was incomprehensible to many contemporaries. Entire regiments had been reduced to scattered survivors. Medical infrastructure, rudimentary at best, quickly collapsed under the weight of the wounded. Field hospitals overflowed. Surgeons worked relentlessly, often with unwashed instruments, performing amputations in barns and churches. The ground itself, soaked in blood, offered little respite to the wounded who lay for hours, sometimes days, before receiving treatment or burial. Strategically, the battle was inconclusive. Lee maintained his defensive posture throughout the day and successfully withdrew his army back across the Potomac River on the night of September 18 and into the 19th, unpursued. Despite holding the field, McClellan failed to destroy Lee's army or prevent its escape, his cautious approach once again drawing criticism from President Lincoln and the War Department. Yet politically, the implications were profound. Though not a clear military victory, Antietam allowed the Union to claim the strategic initiative. 5 days later, on September 22, President Lincoln issued the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. This act reframed the war. No longer was it solely a fight to preserve the Union, it now carried a moral imperative to end slavery in the Confederate States. Internationally, the battle served to forestall diplomatic recognition of the Confederacy by Britain and France. With Lincoln's proclamation tying the Union cause to abolition, European powers, particularly the British government, where slavery had been outlawed, found it increasingly untenable to support a rebellion that sought to preserve human bondage. In this context, Antietam's aftermath extended far beyond the confines of the battlefield. It marked a turning point not through tactical triumph, but through the political consequences it made possible, consequences shaped in equal measure by military bloodshed and presidential resolve. The unprecedented scale of carnage at Antietam forced a reckoning with the Union Army's medical practices. What had once been a loosely organized, often ad hoc system of battlefield care underwent critical restructuring under the guidance of Dr. Jonathan Letterman, medical director of the Army of the Potomac. Before Antietam, wounded soldiers often languished for hours, or even days, before receiving basic treatment. The chaos of the battlefield, combined with a lack of trained personnel and poor logistical planning, meant that many died from wounds that were otherwise survivable. At Antietam, the shortcomings were exposed with brutal clarity. Thousands of wounded lay scattered across fields and farmsteads, many succumbing to shock, infection, or exposure before help arrived. Letterman responded not with temporary fixes, but with a systemic overhaul. He established the first coordinated ambulance corps in American military history, staffed not by random orderlies but by trained personnel with clear command structures. Under his system, ambulances were dispatched quickly and efficiently from the front lines, dramatically reducing the time between injury and treatment. He also instituted a triage protocol that prioritized care based on survivability rather than social rank or regimental affiliation, an innovation that proved vital in managing mass casualties. Field hospitals were organized and standardized, located strategically to avoid overwhelming any single site. These facilities, though crude by modern standards, represented a significant advance in battlefield medicine. Antietam's horror accelerated the implementation of these reforms, and the battle became an inflection point in the professionalization of military medical care. The improvements initiated by Letterman would become foundational principles in future conflicts, setting precedents that echoed well into the 20th century. In the grim aftermath of the bloodshed, the Civil War began to forge a new, more structured approach to saving lives amid the machinery of war. In the days following the Battle of Antietam, photographer Alexander Gardner, working under Matthew Brady, arrived on the field with a portable darkroom and a mandate that went beyond battlefield topography. What he captured marked a profound shift in the way war was documented and perceived. For the first time, the American public would not merely read accounts or study engravings, they would see, with chilling clarity, the aftermath of combat. Gardner's images were stark, unsparing. Rows of Confederate dead lining the sunken road. Union soldiers collapsed in the cornfield, their bodies twisted in unnatural repose. Dead men, nameless and unburied, lay where they had fallen, frozen in time through the lens of the camera. These were not sanitized depictions meant to glorify or inspire, they were confrontational records of death, rot, and disfigurement. When Brady displayed the photographs in his New York gallery under the title The Dead of Antietam, it caused a sensation. Viewers filed in by the thousands. For many, it was the first time they had been confronted with the human cost of war in such visual terms. Newspapers remarked that Gardner had brought home the battlefield, stripping away abstraction and forcing civilians to reckon with the reality faced by their sons, brothers, and husbands. The photographs also initiated a broader discourse on the ethics and function of visual media in wartime. While some criticized the display as morbid or indecent, others recognized its potential as a form of moral witness. These images not only documented events but shaped public sentiment, adding a new layer of scrutiny to military leadership and influencing how the war would be remembered. Antietam thus became more than a turning point in military and political terms. It marked the emergence of photography as a critical instrument of historical memory, one that could confront a nation with the consequences of its decisions in a way that no dispatch or speech ever could. Through Gardner's lens, the battlefield was not merely observed, it was exposed. Antietam's legacy has endured not only through military and political discourse but also through the deliberate act of preservation. In the decades following the Civil War, efforts to safeguard the battlefield gained momentum, driven by veterans organizations, local advocates, and national recognition of the site's historical significance. Unlike many battlefields that succumbed to development, the terrain around Sharpsburg remained largely rural, allowing a rare degree of geographical integrity to be maintained. In 1890, Congress established the Antietam National Battlefield Site, placing it under federal protection. The creation of this park signaled a broader shift in American historical consciousness, a recognition that physical landscapes of war should be preserved as sites of memory, instruction, and reflection. Monuments began to rise, Union regiments first, followed eventually by Confederate memorials, each one marking not merely positions in a line of battle but acts of valor, sacrifice, and endurance. The battlefield also became a field classroom. As the 20th century progressed, historians, military officers, and educators increasingly used Antietam to illustrate tactics, leadership decisions, and the broader consequences of civil conflict. Its terrain, still echoing with the contours of 1862, offered a unique opportunity to study war not in abstract terms but in the soil where it had unfolded. In recent decades, preservation efforts have expanded, confronting the challenges of encroaching development and environmental change. Local historians and national organizations have worked in tandem to acquire threatened parcels of land, restore historical sightlines, and protect burial grounds. Interpretive programs now connect visitors not only to the military narrative but to the civilian experience, the impact on enslaved people in the region, and the broader implications for American identity. Antietam remains a site where past and present intersect with rare immediacy. As one of the best preserved Civil War battlefields, it continues to shape public understanding of the conflict, through its monuments, its trails, and the silent witness of its fields. Its preservation stands not as a monument to victory, but as a commitment to remembering the cost of disunion and the fragile burden of national purpose.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on possible future topics. What areas of human evolution would you like to explore next? Leave your suggestions in the comments, and let's keep the conversation going. As always, our references and further reading are listed in the description below if you'd like to dive deeper into the subject. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.